Yoda died, telling Luke that when he was gone, Luke would be the last of the Jedi. But the galaxy was not empty. Ahsoka Tano was still alive, carrying lightsabers that were neither Jedi Blue nor Sith Red. Kanan Jarrus had only just given his life, while Ezra Bridger had vanished into deep space, and Cal Kestis had survived Order 66 entirely. All four had carried lightsabers. All four had fought for the light. Either the Grand Master was wrong, or being the last Jedi meant something narrower than being the only one left. The answer was not survival or worthiness, but succession. It was the question of who inherited the Order when the Order itself was gone. Of the four, Ahsoka Tano went furthest into the institution before walking away from it. The Order had raised her from childhood, brought her to the Coruscant Temple young, shaped her under the Jedi Code, and tested her through the trials. Yoda himself assigned her to Anakin Skywalker as a Padawan during the Clone Wars. She fought on the front lines of major battles. She earned the trust of the troopers who served beneath her. By every measure, the Order at its height recognized that she began as a true Jedi student. Then the Order broke her trust. In the Clone Wars Season 5 finale, The Wrong Jedi, Ahsoka was framed for the bombing of the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. The Council, the institution that erased her, expelled her before her trial began. She was handed over to the Republic for military judgment. When her name was cleared, Anakin uncovered the real bomber. The Council then offered her the chance to return. Ahsoka turned down the offer because the damage had already been done. The Order had cleared her name, but it could no longer claim her trust. During the Siege of Mandalore, Ahsoka fought alongside the 501st Legion with the discipline and skill of a fully trained Jedi, but she did so as someone outside the Order. When Order 66 began, the clones still hunted her. Palpatine's Purge did not care that she had walked away. The Purge still treated her as a target connected to the Jedi, even though she had left the Order. She survived the Purge and eventually built new lightsabers, but the blades she carried afterwards were no longer Jedi Blue or Green. They were white, a color that visually separated her from the traditional Jedi Blue and Green, and from Sith Red. By then, Ahsoka was no longer trying to return to the Order. The final test of that choice came on Malachor, where Ahsoka found Darth Vader standing over Ezra Bridger, about to kill him, and drew the Sith Lord's attention onto herself. He offered to spare her life in exchange for the location of any surviving Jedi, but she told him there were none left, that he and his Inquisitors had already killed them all. When he claimed Anakin Skywalker had been weak, and that he had destroyed him, Ahsoka swore to avenge her old master, and Vader reached for the language of the Order itself, reminding her that revenge was not the Jedi way, as if she were still bound to the code. Her answer was to reject the title completely, denying she was any Jedi at all. And then she struck. The refusal was not only grief for the man Vader claimed to have killed. The Emperor's most powerful servant tried to hold her inside the Order she had been raised in, and she refused the frame to his face, drawing the same boundaries she had set when she walked away from the Council, now seated under the worst possible pressure to the one person who most wanted it untrue. Ahsoka had stepped outside the institution by her own choice. From Fulcrum to her white blades, to her refusal to reclaim the title. Every decision afterwards reinforced that line. On Dagobah, Yoda's standard was clear. She could not inherit something she had already chosen to leave. By contrast, Kanan is one of the strongest cases for a real Jedi survivor, because his interrupted path was later recognized in story. Kanan was born Caleb Doom, and raised inside the Coruscant Temple as a youngling. By the Clone Wars, he was the Padawan of Jedi Master Depa Billaba, a member of the High Council. He was still a young Padawan, fighting beside his master on Kalar when Order 66 was issued. The clones who had served beneath them turned instantly. Billaba died holding them off so Caleb could escape. He ran for the rest of his youth. Kanan survived the fall of the Jedi, but survival left him with a broken path instead of a completed one. For the next decade and a half, Caleb Doom hid behind the name Kanan Jarrus. He carried a blaster, something uncommon for a Jedi. He kept his lightsaber broken into pieces, hidden away, and only assembled it when survival demanded it. In the years before Rebels, he was drifting, drinking too much, getting into bar fights, and refusing to think of himself as a Jedi. The boy from Kalar became a man who survived by bearing the life he was supposed to have. When Kanan finally took on Ezra Bridger as his new student, he was teaching from incomplete knowledge. He was a former Padawan training a Padawan without the temple system or the council to support them. Kanan repeatedly acknowledged the limits of his own training. He had not finished his formal instruction. He did not know every discipline the Order would have expected. He doubted whether what he could give Ezra would be enough. That fear came from the gap between what he had become and what the Old Order would have required. His knighting came inside the Lothal Jedi Temple. There, Kanan faced a vision in the form of a Jedi Temple guard, a masked sentinel tied to the Old Order. The vision tested him in combat, then it removed its mask and revealed the face of the Grand Inquisitor, the Empire's chief hunter of surviving Jedi and a former Jedi who had fallen. The vision recognized Kanan as a knight. Kanan's knighthood came from the Lothal Temple, not from the Council or the structure he had lost as a child. It was real, a Jedi Temple vision tied to the Order's own symbols, but deeply different from the path he had been raised to follow. His story ended on Lothal, not in exile or succession. Kanan gave his life holding back the fire long enough for the Ghost Crew to escape, and that sacrifice became the clearest proof of what remained in him. He was not simply a survivor of the Jedi. He lived as one through the life he protected at the cost of his own. But Kanan died before Yoda spoke those words on Dagobah. There was no one left in his line to receive the charge. His succession ended with his sacrifice. Through Kanan, Ezra Bridger became one of the few Jedi trained from the beginning in a galaxy that no longer made Jedi. Ezra was born around the fall of the Republic and raised on Lothal, an Outer Rim world the Empire had hollowed out for fuel and ore. After his parents disappeared into Imperial detention, he learned to survive on his own before he could fully understand what had happened to them. By the time Kanan found him stealing Imperial crates in Capital City's market, the institution that had once made Jedi had been gone for more than 14 years. His training never resembled the path Yoda knew. Ezra was taught by a Padawan who had never completed his own training, and that shaped everything about the way he learned. His lessons happened in the cargo hold of a rebel ship, often between battles, with no council to evaluate him, and no group of younglings learning beside him. The lineage was real, but it was fractured. Ezra had Kanan, not the full temple system, the library, or the generations of teachers that had supported the Old Order. Ezra entered the Lothal Jedi Temple, a hidden temple far from the Coruscant center of the Old Order. There, he faced a vision of his deepest fears, and received a Kyber crystal, the focusing stone at the heart of every Jedi lightsaber. It was a real Jedi rite, performed in secret, with no council to witness or sanction it. Yoda himself reached Ezra through the Force, guiding a student he had never formally trained, helping shape his path before Malachor. Of all the ways a Jedi could be connected to the Old Order, that was one of the most direct. And still, Yoda did not name him. One reading is that guidance from a distance was not the same as standing before a dying master and receiving a final charge. What the films show us is a Grand Master who reserved that final word for the student physically present in front of him. Yoda and Obi-Wan had a specific plan. Someone had to face Vader, stand before the Emperor, and decide what the Jedi future would become. Ezra was not part of that plan. He was beyond the known galaxy, unreachable when it mattered most. In the Star Wars Rebels finale, Ezra's place became even more complicated. During the liberation of Lothal, he vanished into deep space with Grand Admiral Thrawn when the Purrgil, massive whale-like creatures that traveled through hyperspace, pulled them beyond the known galaxy. Years later, he was found alive on Peridea, living among a small community called the Noti. That confirmation came long after Yoda's death. By the time he identified Luke as the Last Jedi, Ezra had been missing from the known galaxy for years, unreachable and unknighted. Yoda could not pass the Order's future to someone the galaxy could no longer reach. Succession requires presence, a master who can speak, and a student who can answer. Then there was Cal. Cal Kestis escaped Order 66 with his master's damaged lightsaber and a grief he could barely contain. Cal had been a Padawan under Jedi Master Jaro Tapal during the Clone Wars, and that bond became the reason he survived. When the Purge began, they were aboard a Republic cruiser as the clone troopers turned against them. Cal lived because Tapal did not. For years, Cal hid on Braca, a junkyard planet where the Republic's old warships came to be scrapped. Working as a rigger, he climbed through the carcasses of dead capital ships. He did not use the Force. Survival meant learning to live without the part of himself that had once defined him, sealing it off day after day while the Empire stripped the bones of the Republic for scrap around him. He kept it buried until the Empire's Inquisitorius, an order of dark-side hunters tasked with eliminating surviving Jedi, finally tracked him down. What followed was a slow and brutal return to the path. Fallen Order shows Cal recovering his abilities one fragment at a time. He regained Force Pull, Force Push, and double-bladed combat through memory and survival. Cere Junda, his former Jedi mentor, and BD-1, a small droid carrying records from an older Jedi mission, guided him. Cal did not train in the old institutional sense. He fought his way back to what he had been forced to bury. On the icy planet Ilum, once one of the Jedi's most sacred crystal worlds, and later scarred by Imperial exploitation, he found a new kyber crystal and used it to construct a new lightsaber. The weapon carried his trauma forward and became the symbol of who he chose to be. By the end of the game, Cere recognized him as a Jedi Knight in the cockpit of their stolen ship, the Mantis. It was a quiet ceremony between two survivors, one former Jedi naming what another had fought his way back to. Cal's recognition came after Braca, the Inquisitorius, and Ilum. After years of hiding the Force to stay alive, Cere was not completing an old temple process. Cal had been recognized, but not by the Order's surviving line. His knighthood came from a fellow survivor, not from the last Grand Master. Recognition and succession are not the same thing. Whether Cal was alive by the time Yoda died remains unclear. The games end before the Battle of Endor. What is clear is that Cal's path was improvised, urgent, and shaped by survival and trauma. His mentor had also stepped away from the Order, even though canon recognizes him as a Jedi survivor and warrior. The lightsaber Cal rebuilt, the battles he survived, and the lives he protected prove that the Jedi had not vanished with Order 66. That is where Luke becomes the exception. Of all of them, he had the weakest path by every measure the Old Order recognized. Obi-Wan Kenobi sent Luke to Dagobah. The Grand Master accepted him, tested him, and warned him. Luke trained hard, failed often, and cut his training short to save his friends against Yoda's warning. When Luke returned in Return of the Jedi, Yoda treated Luke's formal training as incomplete, but still left him with one final test, facing Vader without falling to the dark side. Luke had faced the cave on Dagobah, confronting a version of his own darkness. He had endured defeat on Cloud City, losing his hand and learning the truth about Vader. His final test would come in the throne room above Endor, where he would face the pull of the dark side and choose whether the Jedi future would be built through mercy or revenge. That student was Luke. By that role, Luke was the one. The others belonged to different branches of the post-Order Jedi legacy. In the Ahsoka series, the former Jedi Baylan Skoll, a man who had trained in the ways of the Order but long since walked away from them, used a bitter phrase for Jedi shaped after the fall of the Old Order. Baylan had studied the ways of the Jedi, but he no longer lived as one. He calls some of these post-Order successors Boken Jedi. A Boken saber is a lightweight wooden training weapon used by the Jedi Order for practice. Baylan turned the term into an insult, wooden sword standing in for the real thing. The term is not a settled category, and it came from a bitter man drifting towards the dark. But the insult points towards the same divide at the heart of Yoda's final words, the old temple model versus the fractured Jedi paths that followed its collapse. Luke had no temple childhood, no council, no trials in any traditional sense. He was older than any youngling the Old Order would have accepted. By every formal measure, he had less institutional training than Ahsoka, Kanan, Ezra, or Cal. And yet Yoda chose him, not because he was the most qualified, because he was the one standing there when the Old Order had nothing left but one dying master and one student. The word had stopped being a title anyone could grant. It had become something passed directly from one person to the next. Luke was the one who received it. Yoda had outlived everything he built. The Republic, the Council, the Order that never saw Palpatine coming. What he placed on Luke was not a legacy intact, it was the last move of a master who carried the code, the trials, and the standards in his own mind because there was no temple left to hold them. After the temple fell, the Jedi's future no longer moved through one clean line. It survived in scattered lives that kept serving the light without restoring the institution that had once defined it. Luke's burden was different. Yoda could still name him face to face and leave the Old Order's future in his hands. By the standard Yoda carried into that hut, the one the Old Order had held for 1,000 years, none of them were Jedi in the sense he meant. Not because they had failed, because the institution that defined the word had collapsed, and only one person had stood before its last living master and received what remained of it. The others were something the Old Order had no name for, something the galaxy needed just as badly, but not, by Yoda's measure, Jedi. Yoda's words came from Dagobah, from the last place where the Old Order still had a living master to speak for it. Luke was the student standing before him, the one still able to receive that final charge. Beyond Dagobah, the Jedi legacy had already scattered into other lives, other losses, and other forms of service the Old Order could no longer contain. The future would not belong to only one path again. But Dagobah itself was never a random hiding place. There was a dark truth about why Yoda chose that world, something beneath the surface that the Grand Master needed close to him during his final years. That story picks up where this one ends. If you want to understand the full weight of what he carried into that swamp, his story stretches far beyond one deathbed and one student. 800 years of war, wisdom, failure, and exile. The entire story of Master Yoda runs deeper than any single moment on Dagobah.